Hey, all right. Welcome everybody. I'd like to join everyone to our March CCA Oregon Zoom call. This evening, our guest speaker is Ben Walczak. Ben is the North Willamette Watershed District Biologist. He has been with us in the past. He was with us in February of last year and had a really good meeting. That information is on our Zoom channel as well. Had a great presentation. And tonight, Ben's bringing us some more information talking about the coho, steelhead, and salmon on the Clackamas. So, hey, good to have you, Ben. See, you're on mute. Um,
Yeah,
all right.
nice to be here. Yeah, I've got, if you guys are ready, thank you for the introduction. I've got a couple of quick slides that are very focused up. Just so you guys know, my district runs basically from the Columbia down to Salem. That's the north-south boundaries. My western boundary is the Willamette River, and my eastern boundary is the crest of the Cascade Range. So the main systems there obviously are the tributaries of the Molalla, the Clackamas, and the Sandy. So that's where I spend most of my time. And we can have, I've got, this presentation is more Clackamas centric, but if you guys have questions on those other systems and what's going on, feel free. The slides are mainly to just keep me on track. So if I see a hand up or something, that's by all means probably the best way to do this here. Let me see if I can share this thing. Where is the share? More share screen. Come on. Give me just a second here.
No worries.
Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. I cannot see you, so if someone will let me know.
Yep, we're good.
If a hand is up, we're good. Okay. So that's not the start though. I always like to start with this slide. Again, as I told you, my district is pretty much the Portland metro area. So roughly half the state's population in my district. And the green are counties in my district, and the blue are every other county in the state. And this is annual license sales, just license sales by county for the calendar year roughly of 22 to 23. As you can see, the bulk of license sales in the state originate in my district, and I like to tell people it is my responsibility to provide fishing opportunities to those people. But there's also a lot of infrastructure in my district, and winter steelhead are listed, coho are listed, spring chinook are listed in my district. So it makes managing a little more challenging than say on the coast or on the east side of the state. Then this is kind of the bulk of what I wanted to talk about. So our programs on the Clackamas, they're integrated programs that we run. They're winter steelhead and spring chinook. The coho are done by the federal hatchery at Eagle Creek. We don't have anything to do with what they do. They're an entirely separate entity that's the federal government. So if you think Clackamas, what the state is responsible for as far as hatchery production is winter steelhead and spring chinook. And they're integrated stocks, and it's very important. As you guys know, that means you need healthy wild populations. So this is a graph that was put together by Nick Ackerman. He's a fish biologist for PGE. And it shows 1958 to 2023 by calendar year and not run year. So when I asked for when I asked for this presentation or the data for this, it was the fall of 2023. And so it was an incomplete run year. Other things to note on here is that from 1980 to 2005, you can see the bracket there that includes unmarked hatchery fish. So when fish were passing through North Fork, listing started around 2000. So the marking kind of came online about 2002 to 2005 would be, and then everything after that was for sure marked. So the numbers are a little off there. 2010, 2011 is when PG had they had to go through a relicensing process for their dams through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. And under that, there was a lot of negotiations done around fish passage, and they spent PGE spent tens of millions of dollars to come up with state-of-the-art improvements. And a lot of those improvements really came online between 2011 and 2015. And those improvements included things like making the fish sled or river mill much more fish friendly, so fish move through the system faster. 1,000 CFS surface collector. I don't know if you've seen that big tower up at in Estacada Lake, or I mean not Estacada Lake, in North Fork. And so they have there's like nets underground or under the water for spill. There's all kinds of different things they did. Tremendous amount of work. What they did right was, in my opinion, is they asked their fish bios and not to help the engineers come up with a solution, and not have the engineers tell the fish bios what the solution was. And as you can see, all these numbers, they just, there's a couple year lag because all those species we're talking about go to the ocean and come back for 1 to 3 or 4 or 5 years. And as you can see, that it's just incredible what's going on. Like every year, every season tends to be a record. And this is a stack bar graph too. So the other thing was, in the early, coho weren't doing well prior to 2010. And so the early and late run coho, do you guys know what those are?
No, if you break that down, that'd be great.
Yeah, so early coho are the early returning. So there used to be a really broad peak that, say, started in, mid-August and went till, let's call it Halloween. They were basically our hatchery production kind of strays or hatchery production fish. And then we would have, it was like a bimodal peak, and then we wouldn't have much. And we'd have this little blip of these fish that came back around Thanksgiving all the way into the end of February. And those were the late run. They're genetically distinct from the earlies. And they're very unique. And they're probably the historic tale of what used to be a larger, like one big bell curve, but through, all the different, you name it, hatcheries, harvest, all the changes, that's kind of gone away. And there was the 2 peaks, but they did a lot of work, genetics to distinguish. And it's actually fairly easy to distinguish early from a late visually in the latter, but they proofed it up with genetics. And so around 2010, they're like, we're good enough at this, we can differentiate earlies and lates. And that's why you see the different colors, the kind of the burnt orange and the black for coho after that time period. And you can see coho have really, really taken off under the new program. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit later. But spring Chinook are also doing very well. We've had a couple record years for spring Chinook. And what's concerning is steelhead. They're not doing as well. You can see they've kind of just hung out where they're at between, say, 1 to 2,000 fish. And again, this is North Fork. So basically everything that goes from the city of Estacada upstream. Why that's important is you really need to have these wild runs that are stable or increasing to be able to have the flexibility to do any kind of management, which includes integrating fish, fisheries, designing fisheries around them. So keep this in mind. This is this kind of stuff that allows you that flexibility.
And
any questions on this slide? It's a really dense slide, but it just kind of shows the improvements and then like the rocketing change. And it's from 1958 when passage was provided at North Fork.
Quick question I would have, Ben, is I don't see any summer steelhead represented here. Does the Clackamas not have a summer steelhead run?
It has them, but in the early 2000s, they were no longer passed above North Fork due to the listing and everything.
So they were all.
So they were probably just lumped in as unmarked hatchery fish prior to those dates.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, that is one that I guess, summers are their own beast in the Clackamas. As you guys know, the fight is kind of, I just didn't touch it with this slide. How's that?
Yep.
Any other questions around the slide? Okay, I'll move on, because this is the stuff that that I would take to make decisions. This is one of the best records we have. It's very stable. It's 100% of the fish adult fish go through the ladder. The ladder itself and their fish counting station, I don't know if you guys have ever been there. They don't actually handle fish anymore. They have a system where they can just shunt fish. Wild fish go up, and hatchery fish, they basically go into like it looks like a reverse grain elevator that's full of water, and then the liberation truck will drive underneath it, and boom, they all go with the water into the truck. Truck takes them down to our hatchery. That's the system. They get flushed right into our pond. We hold them. It's pretty slick. But again, that's a huge benefit to fish because they're not getting the stress of being handled a lot. So everything was kind of done mindful of fish at that facility. If you guys get a chance to tour it, I would suggest doing it. It's state of the art. It's kind of, I wish other power companies would kind of take their lead and follow what they're doing. You can see it works.
And Dale Ballard here. While we're on that scope, you mentioned the winter steelhead. What is inhibiting their recovery?
Good question. There's a lot of theories. One of them is there's some diseases and stuff that show up in the Clackamas when the water temperature hits 60 degrees. And so that is roughly, it used to be around tax time, and this is in the Willamette. So the disease, they can get it in the Clackamas, they can get it in the Willamette, and then get it in the Lower Columbia, but it's a cumulative disease. So kind of the more they're exposed to it, the more likely they are to die. And we did some tests with some sentinel fish, which are basically hatchery fish from the hatchery. We put them at sport craft, and we watched them, and it was 100% mortality within like 2 weeks when we knew that disease was there. So I think what's happening is the windows for when fish out migrate are getting shorter and shorter. It used to be, like I said, around tax time was when the Willamette hit 60. Now it's about April 1st. So you've already lopped off two weeks of out migration time, which is kind of prime time. I think it's just things like that are happening. Then the Willamette's backwatering as well, which doesn't help fish if they need current to kind of navigate. Those are a couple of things that I think probably could be, in river are happening. And then there's, they go out to the middle of the ocean, not the continental shelf. And right now they're hitting basically the blob. They're also surface oriented fish. So they basically stay in the upper part of the water column when they're in the ocean. So there's I think it's just a lot of different factors. I've always wondered that myself, because if you look at, especially with this graph is North Fork and above, the habitat, that looks like a steelhead stream to me. Like, yeah, I'm a biologist, but man, I'd love to go steelhead fishing. That's what I dream of steelhead fishing, is runs like that and pools like that. I don't know. So that is the key question, right? This year I could tell you it's early, but it looks like we're going to have probably the best run since 2015, 2016. And I have a couple of slides here to show you. Those were some very strong years.
We've got
Alex
has his hand up with a question. Alex?
Sure.
Ben, how's the broodstock program doing on the Clackamas?
Yeah, let me see if I have it on here. Right here. So we'll switch to winter steelhead here. So here's the numbers, and this is get at your question, the longer answer here. As you can see I only went back to 2000. because that's about when listing came online, everything else, right? So that's kind of the time when we're at the current climate where we have to work in. And you can see these fish, they go between 1,000 and 2,000 really. The average is about 2,200. And this is, again, wild fish, because that we have an integrated stock with how we have to manage. We have, if you guys don't know, I don't know who all's on there. It's an angler caught program, very similar like the Wilson, the Trask, the Silettes. The difference is over there, their fish are not listed, my fish are listed. And you can see the delisting goal is that blue line up there at, 11,000, 10,500. Given that I have to use a sliding scale, depending on what I can integrate, the amount I can integrate, and the amount I can release. So right now our program is working as what I'm allowed to do. We have all our brood collected. We'll start to spawn. They had a first spawn today. They looked at fish. I mean, I wouldn't really call it a spawn. It was like it was like a testing the fish. They spawn a few. Next week and the week after would probably be like go time. And what I've heard so far is everything is on pace to be just fine. We should hit our egg take and everything. The difference with our program versus the coastal ones is we live spawn our fish. So the males go right back in the system and the females do as well after we get their eggs out. It's a lot of work for the hatchery staff and my staff to make that happen. But I do think it's working kind of as intended. I wish I could get more fish, but now you can see where it's a difficult ask to be able to get more fish if I could even find the space. And, if the trend was going up like 2015, 2016, it would be it would be an easier ask than if it's going down. The reason 2020 is gray is that was the COVID year and we lost funding to do surveys. So we just used the counts at North Fork. 22 and 23, the data was not crunched yet. So when I was building this slide, I just didn't have it to add it. So they're a little bit higher, but not a ton higher than that. So that's kind of where we're at with winter steelhead. I wish we could have more, but with the numbers, given that they're an integrated stock, this is what we kind of are working with here.
Yeah, if we could pause real quick. Alex, you've had your hand up for a few. Go ahead.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Now I got my microphone turned on. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Going back to your very first slide, I just wanted to confirm the data is the same data that we pull up on PGE's website that's labeled North Fork Adult Trap, right?
That is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure we were looking at the same numbers there because I frequently look at that and depend on it accurately, and I'm glad to know that it is accurate.
Yeah, I mean, within a few fish, right? Like that,
sure.
I have my stuff is a little bit more data checked, but it's very close.
Yeah. Okay. That was what I want to check.
Yeah.
And I don't want to jump the gun. I'm assuming you're probably going to get into a little bit about brood stock and stuff down the road in your presentation.
Yeah, we can. I was just going to switch around a little bit. I don't know who all's on the screen, so I didn't want to get into like the nitty gritty of like how we actually collect our winter steelhead brood stock. Well, if you guys want to hear that, I can. I kind of gave you the very high version of it, but it's very similar, just like a few nuance differences around listed fish. And what
well, please you continue as you are, and as we get to the end, if there's specific questions regarding that, then I'll chime in.
Okay. Yeah. So again, right now we use 48 fish for our brood, for our angler caught brood that we add into our hatchery fish. We generally tend to spawn hatcheries with hatcheries and wilds with wilds in that. So, but they all sit in the same holding pond. So we try and mature them as best we can. Unlike like the facilities on the Wilson where they have a hatch house dedicated to this, with like they can control temperature and like everything, they can spawn much smaller groups. I don't have the infrastructure to be able to do that. So we do what we can. We spawn as many as we can. We try and pull the groups together as best we can. But we do seem to have I would say, a pretty good quality fish going out. And we released, just so you guys know, in total, 265,000 smolts. So it's for a steelhead program, I would call it like a moderate size program. Not large, but moderate and definitely not small. We acclimate about 50,000 of that. We acclimate in the lower river. The rest right now are direct release from Clackamas hatchery. We did have a contract with the feds to have 110,000 of them at Eagle Creek National. They declined to renew our contract. So we were trying to acclimate a little bit at Eagle Fern Park on Eagle Creek, if you guys know where that is. And we had a huge cedar tree bisect my pond, so it's not an option until I get that fixed. I'm working with the county to do that, but in the meantime, they're at the hatchery direct release. They're still in basin. They got moved around a little bit. But I do like the creek as a fishery. It's a very fishable at most conditions. It's very equitable. You don't need a lot to go. You just need a car basically to get there, and you can walk around. Access at the creek over time has been diminishing, but there's still some very good access. It's very scenic. I don't know. It's kind of I like that kind of a fishery. I wish I could do more there on that creek, especially with the federal facility up there. But takeaway, they're still in the basin if people ask. They just had to move them. Any other questions about that?
Yeah, talking about the broodstock, you mentioned that you would match hatcheries with hatcheries and natives with natives. Is it different on the Sandy? I know a volunteer that was up at the hatchery that he said no, that we're usually doing a hatchery with a native, which kind of surprised me. And
No, so it's roughly the same there. We do hatchery with wilds as well, but what I've been able to do there is the difference is that when I have a wild cross, the offspring, I can keep them in a separate group, and then my staff and the hatchery staff manually will clip their left maxillary. So I know that when they come back, I have the parents were both wild, and I'll try and use that hatchery fish with a wild fish. So I have it's a tiered approach: hatchery wild, but one of the parents it's basically an F1. If you guys know what that is, it's like the first generation, and then wilds. But I have a way of telling. I just don't have the staff time or the money to do that at both facilities. Because I'm pulling my staff off of their other duties to do that, to check. So programs are very similar on the Sandy and the Clack. Angler caught, spawn, held, reared in basin, all that. Well, I guess the Clack, they move out. We don't have good enough water in the summer to keep them here, but they get moved back in the fall. Any other questions on this? Or winter steelhead in general?
Yeah, another question. So Dale had asked about what some of the challenges, and you mentioned the disease. Are we having the same challenge with the Molalla steelhead?
More than likely, yeah. So the Molalla, it's much more different for me to get a handle, like a very solid handle on the Molalla and what's going on in the Molalla. We don't have a dam, and two, I don't have any funding to do the intensive surveys that we do, and especially the sandy or the clackamas for winter steelhead. The best I can do is my staff will go out there with some of our research staff right around the peak and try and get as many miles of survey done in a day as we can. So I get a snapshot of what's going on in there, but it's that's what it is. It's a snapshot. We did some radio telemetry work on winter steelhead, and about 30% of all the fish going over the falls, Willamette Falls, tuck into the Molalla and use the Molalla, is what that study found. So it's very important to the upper Willamette, and I try and keep my thumb on it as much as I can, but frankly, it's very hard to get in there to do like a very good survey, given everything we've got going on in the Molalla. But yeah, the Molalla has, you know, it's warmer than the Clack even. So I'm sure it's longer in the Willamette form. We've got the Gauntlet of the Falls, so it's all of that, and plus a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions on winter steelhead? We can talk briefly about the sandy if you guys care. I don't know.
Well, I have a question
Sure.
about the. Am I getting feedback?
A little bit.
Okay, let me back up. Ben, this project or kind of when the summer steelhead stopped on the Clackamas probably predates you a bit, or does it?
Yeah. No, I was in
Junior high school.
no college still.
Okay. So anyway, I'm very curious because there's been so much speculation on the hatchery wild coexist side. Ian Corder did a study. Yep. Yeah. And you know how fishermen are. They kind of boil things down and then figure out what to gripe about. And but my take on what happened was that you know, a lot of us bought into the idea of the wild fish would come roaring back if you eliminated that run. And it didn't. It actually declined, and that's been used. And I'm one of those that use it as an example of something that shouldn't have happened. And I'm just curious how the department looks back on things like that. And you know, was it you live and learn, or you know that it'll eventually will happen? What's in general the attitude of the department over that elimination of a program that a lot of us learned to fish on?
Yeah, you know, I get this question a lot, and I would say I used to have a slide. I didn't find it today, but it was a catch card data for what it was worth of the Deschutes, the Clackamas, and the Umpqua for steelhead. And back when summers were in the Clack and the upper Clack, the catch card data would show that, and wherever I gave the presentation, it was always our river is at the bottom, right? But it showed that the Clack was better than the Umpqua and better than the Deschutes, better than the Wilson when those summers were in the upper basin.
Yeah.
So I understand that fishery was hugely successful and hugely popular. I just think what's happening and what has happened in, you know, the 25 years we're talking now, roughly 20 to 25 years since that's happened, is there's a mountain of studies. You're fighting an uphill fight against all the studies and the preconceptions of it. And that runs through the research. It runs through people's biases. It runs through now some of the policy stuff. And that is the battle that, if you have to pick and choose battles, and I'll be frank with you, the battle I chose on the Clackamas was spring Chinook. It was not steelhead or coho. It was spring Chinook.
Advocating for those runs.
Advocating for it, changing that, like reinvigorating that program.
Yeah.
So given I can't be everywhere and do everything, summers were kind of the one that lost out
Yeah.
for me.
So my other question is, and it's one of the things that hatchery and wild coexists is ramping up with, are the economic impacts of decisions like that. So you can simplify that decision down to business at the hangar at the restaurant, or the Chevron station, or the store at Barton, little things, the little guys. Do you think the department, and the loss of all of us going up there and chasing those fish around, do you think the department looks at that as a data point for making those decisions? Or is it, in my opinion, is it political?
It's both, I think, because that's why I lead with that slide on where the license dollars come, is because it benefits me and my, I'm like, hey, you guys should pay attention to this, because half your licenses roughly come from my district.
Really? I think.
Yeah, I mean, if that first slide, I could show it to you again. If you were to, Clackamas County is the leading annual angling license sales in the whole state. 75,000.
So it's a metropolitan area that the populating.
Yeah, you can see the green is the counties. There's 7 counties in my district.
Yeah.
Blue is every other county in the state. And you can see what drives it, right? In the top 5, 4 of the 5 are in my district. Lane is the only one that is not.
Wow.
So that's why I lead with this slide a lot. It's like, hey, you should pay attention to dollars and cents.
Yeah.
But
it's one of those things where a lot of us make assumptions, and personally, I don't think we give the department a lot of times enough credit, because we don't get all the moving parts that you guys deal with. But on the other hand, we have to be a squeaky wheel for things that we believe in and that we want. And as I said, this economic impact and the fact, there are other factors. We vote at a high percentage, and we also give back at a high percentage in terms of consumption. We use the rivers and the oceans and the forest, but we give back a lot. And that's part of where our emphasis is right now. It's a big part of it.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing is, one of the big losses that's not stated economically is that when there was anglers going up to the Upper Clackamas pre-fire, those were families, those were people. Like, it wasn't just the Wild West up there. Now it's going to be interesting to see, given that recreation is really curtailed up there with the campgrounds. I don't know if you guys knew this. It's an interesting fact. So we were trying to do this is kind of an aside, but it'll get there. It's we're trying to do a restoration project. We're under the gun. This was like this most snake bait project ever. We were going to do it the 2 years before the fire, and we had to have a low bid contractor. And long story short, we discontinued after a week on that contract. Like, oh, we'll reassess, replan, redo it the next year. Had everything all laid out. The week we're going to mobilize, we're waiting after Labor Day. Guess what happens on Labor Day? That fire. We're like, well, cool. We'll go. There'll be logs in there. Every log that we had picked out burned up. Can't do it. Go back the next year after the fire and go to get some. There'll be plenty of logs in these campgrounds, right? So we'd knock a couple over, and we run into cultural issues. Can't use those logs. Got to stop. No, we'll go back to the drawing board. So final year, last summer, we finally got the project done. It's the one that's on, I don't know if you guys know, the South Fork Clackamas. Got through everything. Logs are in the creek. Everything looks good. But the thing with those campgrounds that we learned is that they're the only flat spots in the river. And so you had all kinds of people using those for eons. Right. And so, like, where you thought you had something good to do along those areas where it'd make a ton of sense, they're like hugely historic, like very important historical, like burial grounds, those kind of things. And you're like, oh man. So how those campgrounds come back is going to be anyone's guess. There's a tiered plan on how we're going to do it, what the configurations are going to be, all that. And some of them, like, they used to be beautiful because there's big trees in there. Now it's like you can see the road and there's no shade. So I don't know what use along the river corridor is actually going to look like as far as campgrounds, and if people are going to decide to come back to those areas or not.
Yeah,
is my long and short of it. But if you guys want to know why the Forest Service is taking so long, those are some of the issues they're running into.
yeah. Did you say cultural on the logs?
Yeah. So you tip over one of those huge trees and they were finding, like, human remains, like, that kind of stuff where you're like, ooh, this is not
It's
good.
DB Cooper. It's DB.
Yeah, DB Cooper. Yeah, that would be.
So I have one other question. A couple of weeks ago at the Willamette Falls meeting, I asked you about your take on Leeburg and McKenzie hatcheries. Anything different than what you?
I can't really say a ton because of the active litigation, but it's definitely going to affect how we do things.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's not just currently, but probably moving forward as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. So yeah, the upper clock, that fire, just so you guys know, didn't act like a normal fire. It, normal fire gets like kind of hotter as it burns up to the crest of the hill. This, because of the east winds, actually got hotter the closer it got to Estacada. So all the riparian was really hit because it was like a blowtorch with that east wind. Very intense. Some of the areas that got hit the hardest were Fish Creek and the Kullawash, which is scary for winter steelhead because those are the primary producers of winter steelhead in the basin, of wild winter steelhead in the basin. So some of it is total stand loss in there for great swaths of it. So we're, kind of crossing the fingers, figuring out what to do, trying to do as much restoration as we can up there, but it's frankly a huge area. And, we'll see how it bounces back. But there is caution. I would be very cautious about winter steelhead, given that fire and that footprint and how steep those slopes are up there. Kind of sobering. I wish it was a better story, but that's kind of winter steelhead.
Yeah. So is it Robert Bradley? Is Bradley's purview Nehalem?
Yeah, he is basically the mouth of the Columbia. Well, he's around all the way to Big Creek, Nat Creek. We're looped all the way around down to the Nestucca.
So do you know the Nehalem?
I grew up on the Nehalem.
Okay, so when all of those coho move in really fast, why is it so hard to hook them? And you may have it dialed in because you grew up there, but
so I grew up on the river. Like my house was on the river.
Oh God. Okay, well,
you can catch them, but there's only about a 2-week window you can catch them.
There's what was that?
Maybe a 2-week window where you can catch them. Whether good. Same. We can switch over to Clackamas too. Here, we'll talk Clackamas coho too. Same thing happens on the Clackamas, right?
Yeah.
But 20,000 coho in the Clackamas this year. Wilds. And I don't know, a lot more hatchery fish, right? There was, if you include the falls, what went over the falls, there's like 40, 50,000 coho in the Willamette probably, right? And shoot, there was hardly anyone fishing in the Clackamas. Those fish are everywhere. They just don't bite because the water temperature is so warm a lot of the time, and it's clear and it's low, and they're coho, right? They're just like excuse after excuse after excuse.
Yeah.
So, if someone could ever figure out how to catch one of the years, someone's going to figure out how to catch them when it's like those conditions. But those are tough conditions to catch them.
But does it make sense? And this is what I've done with a little bit of success: is just keep an eye on the water temperature. Is that what gets them going?
I think if they're fresh, they're a lot easier to catch.
Yeah.
If you're targeting those fresh fish and not the stale fish in the hole, it's a lot easier to catch. They're a lot easier to catch. If it's a cooler day than a warm, like if you had 3 warm days and a cool day, they're a lot easier to catch. Yeah, that's that water temp. So all this, like mornings and evenings are obviously easier to catch than the middle of the day. You can catch them. They can be frustrating because you're fishing on 5 fish when there's 500 in a hole, kind of, like up in the riffle or something. That's what I found with them. So, but at the same time, you're wearing shorts and flip flops most of the time when you're fishing.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
So this is just a graph, Clackamas coho. You can see we're above delisting, right? The last couple of years, close, a few other years, they're doing well. Like, I don't think anyone, and this is, the numbers are probably a little bit bigger because these are just the ones that the gray bars are what went through North Fork, not plus some of our estimated stuff, observations. So they're a little bit higher than that even. So everyone asks, well, why aren't you going to open a coho season for wild coho on the Clack? And this is that nuanced answer. So because, again, remember, these are listed fish. The unmarked fish are listed. That means to get a season, it starts at the north of Falcon and it goes all the way through all the in-river fisheries up to the Clackamas, and the impacts come off of that process. So it's multiple states involved. It's not just as easy as me saying, hey, we'd like to have a fishery on here, and we have a buffer because you don't want to really take more than that delisting scenario goal. So if you're looking 12,000-ish to 14 to 16,000, so maybe 2,000 fish at the most. How much do you want to go through for a fishery that would last maybe a couple weekends, maybe a month? I don't know. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And then if you throw all those impacts in on top of it, that number is a lot smaller than that. So we have been talking about it. We've been talking about how to design a fishery that would actually be a true opportunity. Similar to some of the questions you brought up with Robert, like how do you get it so it's a true opportunity and not a frustration? You don't reward someone for just snagging a wild fish, right? You want them to fish correctly. There's all kinds of different ways you could do it. I know people aren't going to like it, but you could do like a limited entry would be an option. You could use just only e-ticket. These all have issues. Like, don't get me wrong. Limited entry has huge issues. Only making it available to e-tagging, so you could monitor, like, not quite in real time, but maybe a week's lag. Because creel is hugely expensive. For me to run a creel would be very, very expensive. And the lower Clackamas is very hard to do a creel, and it's a large area with a lot of different access points. So you would need a fairly large staff. So those are the kind of the questions you're like rolling around, like, what is the best way to do this? How would you do it? How would you enforce it? All that has to be thought of. And then remember, it starts in the north of Falcon process.
Dale, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, Ben, so you've exceeded the delisting level there for a couple of years. How many more years do we have to go with that before we could apply for the delisting on that? And if they're delisted, does that north of Falcon process become a little less encumbering?
You would want to see a couple generations. So
Okay.
You're gonna, let's just call it 10 years, right? Because by the time you actually move the paperwork forward, you're gonna, like, if we did it, we've got it 2 years, right? So that's kind of getting close to a generation. If we get another good year, we've got, offspring of offspring, because you got 21 is pretty close, So we're getting close for 1 generation, 2 generations. Okay, we're good. Start the paperwork, start the conversation. You're looking at 10 years, roughly, if you could do it in the Clack. The problem with the Clack is linked to the Willamette. And so that's kind of like there's larger pieces at play than just the clack itself, as far as how they group the basins together for delisting.
But the Willamette above the falls, those are hatchery fish.
Yeah, the coho is the oddity, but spring chinook and winter steelhead are linked to the upper Willamette biop. Yeah. So you're getting into kind of like larger federal management pieces that you would have to get through that. Like, not only would you get through the state piece, you'd have to get through the federal piece too. So I'm going to say at least 10 years for that.
Wow.
Yeah. It would be, I don't think there's a ton of opposition to having a fishery on these wild fish. I think that is a much easier ask. That's ultimately what everyone wants, is you want to be able to fish on fish, right? We're almost there. It's just a question of now, how do you do it? That's the harder thing to ask because of that north of Falcon piece. You don't want to say, oh, I want 2% of the impacts and then shut the Columbia down because you want your 2% and the clack. Like, where does everyone, where would everyone want to fish? For instance, like, that's a broad statement, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of like the give and take on how would you do it? How could you create a carve out that actually works for people? No one, I don't think anyone, maybe you guys would know better than me, but if you had a Thursday and a Saturday, would you even get all that excited about going fishing for coho and the clackamas? I don't know. So those are kind of questions to be determined. I would actually want a season that's like a little bit more consistent. And then, to be as transparent as you can say, it's like, well, if you hit this number, we can have a fishery. So maybe you hit a number at North Fork, whatever that number is that we all decide is a good number, call it 10,000. And any fish after 10,000, we can have a fishery for 2 weeks up there, right? And then, okay, that'll be our impacts. But then everyone knows they can watch the dam counts online too. And, okay, we're going to turn it on or off. But the quality of the fish by then, not so good, so it's all those kind of questions that you have to answer. We're thinking of it. We've had the conversations. It's 2 years,
Yeah.
So Ben, and they've been great years. Yeah.
Ben, would you say, except the fact that you maybe are not at liberty to chime in on this, but would you say that the ODFW as a whole are advocates of broodstock programs?
I don't know. That's a difficult. I think we're very siloed, and so there's different silos that are pro and con.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's a cop-out answer, but depending on who you talk to and what their background is and how familiar they are with programs, I think it varies. And then I also think like not all broodstock programs are the same.
Yeah.
They don't. Some of them are more successful than others, and the reasons why they're extremely nuanced. It could be like, and I'm not saying this is the case, but it could be one facility for whatever reason just produces better fish at that facility than the other one. And they could be like right next door to each other. And so I think there's those kind of like nuances where depending on your experience, you're like, yes or no. So,
but isn't, is it considered an impact on tight budgets? I wouldn't think so, but
no, it's harder to. I think to do a broodstock program correctly, you have to have a lot of like thought and care at every step of the way, which can be hard to accomplish given given the personalities involved and just all the different moving pieces that people are prioritized with, like what are their priorities, like when are their priorities, all of those kind of questions. So it can be a challenge. Thankfully, like in my district, I don't have those challenges. We have other challenges, but you know, it's kind of, that's the way that I look at them. And then the other thing is, I think once you commit to them, you kind of stuck with them for better or worse. And you're tied to wildfish, which you probably should be, but you know, it can be very frustrating. It's like, I want to turn the needle up, but it's like the wildfish are telling me no. Right. And that goes back to our mission statement, which is for, you know, present and future generations. So if you're thinking about the future, you shouldn't be very aggressive. I don't think you should always kind of be more conservative on your every kind of you want for the future as far as touching wild fish and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we are coming up on the bottom of the hour. I see Dale's got his hand up. I know we haven't touched on the salmon yet, Chinook.
Yeah.
Dale?
Yeah, just a quick question regarding the, you mentioned summer steelhead a little bit. Is there or is there not any summer steelhead in there now? And the Clear Creek acclimation pond, is that going to be reinstituted?
Yes. So yes to both questions is a quick answer. Summers, there's what is the number? Don't quote me on this one. 175, 150, something like that in the clock released, and 75,000 in the sandy. They're there. They're just you know, very diminished from what you guys used to fish on 25 years ago. Yep. And then Clear Creek, we'll talk about it right now here real quick. Clackamas Hatchery Spring Chinook. Again, 2020, 21. This is what's returned to the hatchery. Getting to Dale's question, you can see we had pretty good returns for till about 2013. And then stuff fell off a cliff. And then we've kind of started to kind of right the ship, right? So the short answer is Carver. We'll use it again when I feel like we have enough smolts to put in there. Right now, what's happened is there were some management changes. That's the red and the green. So they used to be at Willamette, Marion Forks. That's the blue to the left of 2013. Then they moved to Bonneville. Then they moved, and a lot of this has to do with different things that happened during that time. The core, the listing, a whole bunch of different stuff, right? And then they moved to Eagle Creek again. That's the purple. And the blue is the returns off of those, Eagle Creek. And then you can see Eagle Creek works. You guys remember in the 80s and the 90s when they were at Eagle Creek, clack was a really good fishery.
Yep.
So, and that's pre this slide. So what's happened is crashed. And then I just said, well, let's figure out how to refound this brood. So we went from a segregated stock to an integrated stock. That's this transition that we're currently in right now. It's way too early to tell what's happening. That's why Carver is not being used. I could tell you this year we released 900,000 smolts, which is close to what we want to release in the future. We will see how that goes. Again, I'll know in 2, 3, 4 years what that looks like. That's why we knew there was a problem, but then what do you do? How do you identify it? And then how do you stay, you can see 2014, 2010, we even kind of knew, right? You're like 2010, 2011, we know something's wrong. By 2014, you're starting to make changes. You're trying to figure out what the change is. You do what you can. You figure out the change that you need to make, but then you don't have enough adults coming back to have your program where it is. And so that's where this graph kind of tells you that in a nutshell. It's a busy graph, but that's where we're at. The idea is to refound it using a integrated wild fish spring Chinook are doing well in the Clackamas, and we'll learn from how we do it because we're doing what's called parental based tagging. So all the fish that are spawned, I have their genetics and everything that returns. We'll take genetics off of them. We'll see what was successful and what wasn't. It'll be pretty cool to learn. At a minimum, we're going to learn a lot about broodstock programs with spring Chinook when we do this. I will say that the Clackamas program is modeled after what we've done in the Sandy, and I would say that Sandy program is working well for what it is. I don't know if you guys fish that, but it's a pretty good fishery. So, any questions on that? Blew through spring Chinook there, but
Is the Sandy still pretty underfished as far as the Chinook goes? No, that was a concern at one time.
yes, but I think more and more people are catching on to it. If I could just get those things to return, you
Where
know,
they're supposed to go, right?
yeah, starting now would be pretty awesome. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, we're
Okay.
pretty much at the bottom here. I got about 3 minutes left. Anything else you wanted to share, Ben? I think that was the end
That's
of the
really
deck.
it. If you guys, had any
That
questions,
was
I'm trying.
awesome.
You
No,
didn't
hey,
really fill us in on those silvers on the Nehalem, but that's okay. I know you're
Yeah,
keeping him to
you kept
himself.
that one close to the chest.
Right.
yeah. Oh, you just gotta go fishing all the time for those things like a kid.
Well, on the
You know,
next,
it's so cool when those things are schooling and they're in the evening and they're 50 of them, 60 of them all up at once. It's a great sight to see. It gives it's
Don,
encouraging.
I can
Very
tell you
encouraging.
this about the Nehalem cohos. They're not that hard to catch until all the needlefish come in, and then they're stuffed. Because we catch them all the time and have to let them go when they in the early part of the return. You'll never catch a hatchery fish in the first 2 weeks they're coming back, and then you wait long enough and they're all jumping around, and
Right.
they're stuffed with needlefish, and
Yeah.
that's when I stop fishing them with anything but a fly rod, and then it works.
The smallest thing, the smallest spin fish you can drag out and stuff with anise and drag it right through the middle of the school. That works. That's I'm giving that away free.
Needlefish are little.
As fast as you can.
Little bitty guy.
Yeah, and they're full. Just got one open.
All right, we got 1 minute. So Wade, you're going to fill them in on the rules of this trivia question.
Yeah, real quick before we go there, I just wanted to give a quick shout out for some banquets we got coming down. So Lynn Benton just had the first banquet of our year this last Saturday. Heard it was a good event. So we've got Salem is going to be this coming Saturday on the 16th. Willamette Falls, their banquet's going to be on April 20th. Tillamook is April 27th. Mount Hood's going to be May 4th. Columbia County is May 11th. South Willamette on May 17th. So bang, bang, bang. Love to have you attend a banquet. It's the best way to renew a membership. You can buy your tickets online, CCA Oregon. Go to your chapter. There should be a link to buy those tickets. All right.
And save September 7th for the Portland Golf Tournament.
And September 7th for the golf tournament. Got to be there.
Mm.
Been a good location. All right. So for the trivia question, Dawn's going to kick off a question. And what we want to have you do is use the chat in Zoom. Just punch in the answer. I'll start reading off the answers as they're coming through. The first one to get it correct will win this fabulous new Whopper. All right.
All right. So here it is. These things are like $8 on eBay now. They're famous. Big deal. They're good for, okay. So I'd like to say thanks to Ben for just being straight up, answering the questions, giving us data. And you can just tell that he really cares a lot about what he does. And we all really appreciate that a lot. Okay. So I hope everybody there knows Bruce Pauly. Anybody not know Bruce Pauly? Because if you don't know Bruce or know of Bruce, you're going to be all running on this. We still there?
Yep.
Okay. So, Bruce. He's been with CCA forever. He's been the GRC guy. He's like a fish encyclopedia. So the question is, and this goes to the first person that puts this into chat, is what was his college sport?
God, I know this too.
Tennis.
He played it. This was in college. I'm pretty sure it was varsity. I would guess varsity. And it was a college in California, by the way, but that's okay. What was his sport?
Football seems the easy answer.
Yeah, that's low hanging fruit, man. No, not at all.
Volleyball.
Nope.
Tennis.
No.
Soccer.
Nope. This sport, I'm going to give you a hint now.
Baseball.
Nope. This sport plays into
Water polo.
Yes, water polo plays
All right.
into his passion for fish. Who got that?
That was
Water
Jim Kennedy.
All right. Good enough.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
I'm still waiting for the last prize I got.
What? Wait. I hand delivered the last prize.
No, the teeny book and the whatever it was.
You said to give that to somebody, didn't you?
Well, I thought I was going to use it in my banquet, but
Okay, I got it for you, Jim.
I still haven't received it. I'm gonna keep it.
Yeah, well, I must have messed that up.
But
I'll
I'll take your bunker. I'll take
Yeah.
the bunker for sure.
No, this is African. I mean, this wood,
Oh.
this is a cool one. This is a collection piece right here. Look
I'll
at this.
cherish that.
Yeah, look at this. One hit wonder. Hello. Okay.
I knew he played the water polo. It took me a minute to recall it, but great job.
He told me he killed 3 people.
I would not want to be under those legs getting kicked on by Bruce. No.
It
I
is
just
a
think it's
physical
great.
game. It is.
Yeah.
A
Hey,
physical
Ben,
game.
on behalf of the whole communication committee, thanks again for joining us. And as Don said, we appreciate your honest and interesting information.
Absolutely.
No problem, anytime.
All right. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks
Thanks,
all.
Wade, for running the show.
Thank you, Ben.
Have a great night.
You guys.